Welcome to the briefscoop.com, the news media for the whole Pan-African family, bringing you news that pertains to the African continent and the state of African affairs and the Pan-African family. I am Karanja Gacuca, your host. Hello. I am delighted that joining us today is Ambassador Dr. Arikana Chihombori Quao. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. It is such a joy to have you and to be having a conversation with you. We've spoken before, and I feel like both you and I share an optimism for Africa. I believe that we are both Afro-optimists, not Afro-pessimists. And that's one of the reasons why it's so exciting talking to you about the state of Africa, the state of African affairs. And I would like to have this conversation or series of conversations starting with the state of where Africa is today in the context of where we have come from, how we got to where we are today. We were just talking about your father and your story about how the British came and took the land and torched the land. But I think it goes even further back than that. And part of the reason why it's important to discuss the history is because history is the way that we learn where we are today. To me, it goes all the way back to the 1500s, to Machiavelli. The Prince Machiavelli. He talks about in great detail about how to colonize people. And Machiavelli wrote about how to colonize people in the 15th century. This was for Europeans. It was not meant for Africans. And so his formula applies to any human being. And so Africans and Africa are not unique in any way, shape, or form. The reason that Africans are where they are today is because of a institutionalized and a deliberate process of colonization using the Machiavellian model that has brought us to where we are today. The reason I bring that up is because oftentimes I feel that people often seem to want to classify Africa and Africans as very unique, as somehow being uniquely underqualified, somehow being uniquely incapable. And that is not true at all. This has happened deliberately and in an institutionalized way.
You're quite right about that. But let me say, I like the word uniquely. I think we are unique in the sense that we have been uniquely abused, uniquely exploited, uniquely singled out as a race, specifically for the purposes of abusing us. I think we are having an interview today on a day that I actually have a very heavy heart with everything that's going on in Minneapolis today with George Floyd. And I mean, you can't help but just wonder. We are in the 21st century, and black men are still being hunted down like wild animals. For him to have just been assassinated in front of our very own eyes, that policemen are sitting on his neck, hands in his pocket, looking just as comfortable and so nonchalant, like just nothing was going on when he was committing murder. And of course, we're still trying to recover from the young man in Georgia, Arbery, where he was just hunted down like a wild animal, with guns and tackle him down and just shoot him down. And with all of those who died last year and the many years before, you say to yourself, what is it about the black man that infuriates the white man?
Yeah, sorry to cut you. It's not just those two. There's an Ethiopian man that was shot right here in Maryland, right here in the Maryland area, just this last week also.
That's correct. And in his case, just because he had a knife, not a gun, just a knife, and it was clear that he clearly had mental illness. Police are trained to de-escalate these situations. But when it comes to black men, they don't think they should de-escalate the situation. I remember that Ruth guy who massacred those 8-9 people at the church in South Carolina. The police, when they captured him, they took him to McDonald's to have a hamburger, you know? This is somebody who just murdered in cold blood 9 people, and they took him to McDonald's. It is just unbelievable to say, what kind of human beings are these? You know, this morning I just found myself wondering, I came to this country because of the profound impact my Peace Corps teachers had on me. And these were white Americans. I chose to come to the United States because of the profound effect they had on me, because of the way they were respectful. They were teachers who wanted to invite you to their houses for afternoon tea. In Rhodesia, that didn't used to happen, but the white Americans did that. These were white Americans who wanted to go to your village with you. They wanted to lie on a mud floor with you and get up in the morning, go fetch firewood and go fetch water. They would eat from the same bowl with you. Those are the Americans, the white Americans I came to see in this country. Where are they? Where are they, my son? What happened to them? Do they still exist? I am just appalled to say, who are these police officers? Where did they grow up? What happened to the America that I came here for?
Well, good question, and it makes me wonder. Is that an illusion? Was it an illusion that we had, that perhaps, because I too came here with this image that in the United States, the land of the free, when we're in Africa, we have this impression that racism ended at the turn of the passing of the Civil Rights Law, right? When Dr. Martin Luther King marched and the Civil Rights Bill was passed. I fully had the impression before I came to this country that racism had ended then. Civil rights had began. And oftentimes it's true when you encounter white Americans in Africa, from the Peace Corps and other organizations, they come and you get this feeling that this is a very different kind of person that you encounter when you're in Africa than the reality of being black here. But then once I've gotten here and kind of seen how it is oftentimes for anybody that looks like us, African Americans, Africans, Caribbeans, here in America, it does make you wonder whether this is a system that really sees us as fully human.
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, when you look at it from, I can't help but keep going back to just the atrocities committed by the colonizers on the continent, the atrocities committed by the slavers when they took Africans as slaves from Africa across the Atlantic, the abuse that has been meted to black people in Europe, meted to black people in the Americas, and sometimes even meted to us Africans on the continent.
So I actually have a theory. I'm glad that that was a good segue. And my theory about why the African was colonized is a socio-economic theory around the fact that I do believe that it is an economic thing. I do believe that the reason that the African is so welcoming to outsiders, because I do truly believe that the African is very welcoming to outsiders, is because in Africa, given that all year round, the seasons allow for food to grow all year round, the African has never really had to plan ahead in terms of foraging for food was always available. Food was always available. So the African always had food all year round, whereas the European had to store food because of the winter. So my theory around the colonization of Africa is because Europeans needed to expand in order to find lands that could provide for them more than their own lands did. The African, on the other hand, is very welcoming because the African always has food. So I do believe that sociologically, the social psychology of the African is one that is open to visitors and outsiders, because there's never been lack in Africa. So what is your view on that? Is it an economic thing? Is it purely economics that has driven this hatred, this need to dominate in order, from a sense of a zero-sum universe where if you have, I'm lacking? Because I do believe that there's a northern, the northern hemisphere seems to have this attitude of this sort of psychosocial belief in lack, in a zero-sum existence, in a zero-sum universe.
I disagree with that. I think if you're talking about the haves and have-nots, maybe that theory may have applied in the past, but not anymore. Because now the tables are turned. The haves are on the western side. The have-nots are still on the African continent. So that theory, I disagree with it. I think that you just have some bad elements in a society. Don't get me wrong, I've met a lot of wonderful, wonderful Americans who have been very good friends to me. But within those, within the society, we are running into some rogue elements that are just haters. They are evil people. And if you don't have it within you to hate, no amount of having or not having will drive you to kill, to murder somebody. So the reality is there are elements in our society that have been encouraged. Those elements have always been there. If you go back to slavery, even as we were talking about abolition of slavery, there was still a significant percentage of white Americans who did not want slavery to end. White Europeans who did not want slavery to end. They were quite comfortable continuing to systematically abuse and lynch black people, and it did not bother them. That element has always been there, and it is my humble opinion that it has percolated through, and those are the same elements that we continue to see in our society. They need rehabilitation. How do we go about rehabilitating those who are totally insensitive to the sufferings of others simply because of the color of their skin? But I can also tell you that one thing, that once a hater, always a hater. If I hate you, if they don't hate you because you're black, they're bound to hate their neighbor because their neighbor has something that they don't have. So how do we deal with the issue of hate? They hide behind the color of your skin. But when it's all said and done, those people are haters. You will find even their own communities, they are not nice people. They're going to dislike others who look like them for one reason or another. It's about hate. How do we rehabilitate people? How do we raise a community that has empathy, a community that understands that we are here on this earth for a period of time, and that while I'm here, I'm going to do the best I can to enjoy humanity, to add to humanity, and leave this world a better place. How do we transition from this regressive mentality to a more progressive mentality within the white race so they can get over this hatred of black people? That's something I think it needs to be addressed at a very fundamental level, starting with at school. I understand there are some children who are raised in homes where hate is served on a daily basis, particularly hate for black people. How do we rehabilitate those children? How do we help those children who are born into a home environment that encourages hatred? And to me, that's the fundamental issue. The issue of haves and have-nots, the tables have turned. The haves are the ones who continue to be the perpetrators.
Well, you do say that, but one of the reasons why you have come to prominence was your discussion about France and the pact made by the French, or I don't know if you can call it a pact because it really was very one-sided, the treaties that the French forced the West African countries to sign to turn over essentially all of their wealth, which is what supports the French economy essentially. Without the $500 billion a year coming from French West African countries, France would not be a have, to use your terminology of the haves and the have-nots, correct? And we have similar situations. So going back to Africa, we have similar situations with the Anglophone. Even though there was no similar pact exactly, there were no similar treaties, all across Anglophone Africa, the major...
And I'm going to have to correct you on that one. There is no such thing as Anglophone. They created that, so let's not own it. No Anglophone, no Francophone, we're just Africans.
Agreed with you.
Colonized by the British.
I take that back. So, all across the parts of Africa that did not sign pacts with the French, the parts of Africa that fought for their independence from the British, British companies have continued to be the primary beneficiaries of the wealth of those countries in very similar ways, and I'm sure to the tune of trillions of dollars.
Right.
Coffee, tea, cocoa, all of these are products that only come from the global south. They do not come from the global north. Yet the number one exporter of coffee is Switzerland. The number one exporter of cocoa is Switzerland. So I am somewhat inclined to challenge your theory about the haves and the have-nots. It is true that wealth, the way that we see it, the manifestation of wealth, manifests more in the global north, in America, in Europe, in Canada. However, the actual source of that wealth is still Africa. So I'm still inclined to believe that the hatred is economic based, because Africans are seen as in the way of that, of obtaining, Africans are seen as being in the way of that wealth. Now,
let me address that one. First and foremost, you have to realize the root cause of why these elements are coming to Africa and bulldoze their way and bully the Africans into taking what doesn't belong to them. What is that element that drives you to be so unfair to another human being simply because you got superior weapons, simply because you got, by and large, it's superior weapons, military weapons. So it's still the same base they're coming from. The ability to hate, the ability to be unfair, the ability to not see others as your equal. And so you go in and you bully them and you take what you want to take from them. It goes back to the same premise. Why is it that you cannot go to Africa and treat the Africans fairly? Why don't you have that within you to say, what I want for my children is what they too want for their children, so let's be fair. That ability, that failure to treat others as equals, it goes back to the same root. So it starts with that same being who is selfish, who is greedy, who is insensitive, and that's why it's easier for them to do whatever they do. So you're still already in the same, the base is still the same. So the base needs to change in order for you to be able to engage Africa as equals. In order to engage Africans as equals, you have to first of all realize that, accept them as equal. But because you're coming from a wrong place, you're coming from a place of hate, that's why you are incapable of treating them fairly. Now, the onus then becomes on us to say, for how long are we going to allow to be bulldozed, particularly when this time they are coming to our turf. They are coming to the continent. Take, for example, the reason they are able to get away with African cocoa beans, African coffee, African tea. If you remember years ago, to fly to Africa from the US, you got to fly into Europe. Planes arrive in the morning. You are in Europe all day long, and they leave around 10 o'clock at night. Why were they leaving at 10 o'clock at night? I don't know. I can tell you why. That's the theory. If you're coming from Africa, same thing. You flew to Europe in the morning, all day in Europe. No, it was because they wanted time to take those flowers from East Africa, relabel them. By the time they make it to the US, they are now Belgian flowers. The coffee is now staying in Switzerland. By the time it then goes over to the Americas, it's now Swiss coffee, Swiss chocolate. They were relabeling African products. So we allowed it to happen. This is where we also fall short. Why have we allowed this abuse to go on for as long as it has gone on? You and I, we know better. You know, we can stop this now. We have the means to say, no, enough is enough. We do not need to have our hot chocolate being consumed by Europeans. We have enough Africans to consume our own hot chocolate.
Exactly.
We have enough Africans to consume our own tea and coffee. So before we look outside, because you go into African hotels and restaurants, you are drinking Swiss chocolate, Swiss cocoa that you know came from Ethiopia, came from Kenya, came from Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire. And why can't we stop that? This is what I grapple with. Why can't we stop it in the 21st century to say, let's look inward? It's 1.27 billion of us. We need to consume what we produce. And before we can export to anybody, let's first of all feed the Africans. Let's look from inside.
All right, so I'm so glad that again we've segued to exactly where we need to be. So I guess we are having a discussion on whether it's a chicken and egg discussion, whether the hate comes first or the economics comes first. I truly believe that the economics comes first, and the economics then breeds a hate that is pathological, that is hard to explain, which is why I guess we are having this difficulty in even trying to explain it, even trying to understand it is difficult.
But my son,
it is so pathological.
My son, you can't take out of me what I don't have. You can't make a killer out of me, no matter how hard you try. But you can make a killer out of me if I already have it within me.
And
so what I'm saying is, for them to be able to do that, they already have it within them.
And I believe that this goes back to historically this idea of, I mean, who knows what the psychology is, but I think that the sociological, the sociological aspect of it comes from this mentality of lack based on the fact that they could only provide food during the summer months. And so it's, whether that's what has generated this pathological sort of behavior outlook, whereby I must dominate you and take everything from you in order for me to survive, I guess is a chicken and egg question, and that's an interesting discussion that we can continue to have. However, back to where we are now, where you talk about the fact that they come to Africa, they brand our coffee, they brand our tea. We allow it, we hand it over, we agree. They come to us and they say, you know, that tea, it's only worth pennies per 10 kilos.
And we say, okay.
And we say, fine, which is complete insanity, because you can never go to a store, you can never go to Walmart and say, you know, that TV is only worth $5 to me, I'm gonna take it for $5, and the person on the other side says, yeah, sure. So it's completely insane that that is how we Africans have responded to this. And again, I do believe that sociologically it is because we are welcoming, because we never lacked. We have a welcoming outlook and sociology. But it's very interesting because even when you look at how the Europeans negotiate with each other, for example, with Brexit going on right now, the British are going at it with the EU. They are, they are their neighbors. They look like them. They are their cousins, and they're very vicious. They do not. Their negotiations are very aggressive. So I think that that is very instructive for us as Africans, for the Pan-African family, to see that even between themselves, they are not looking out for the interests of the other. They are looking out for their own interests. And the British do not trust the Europeans to look out for their interests. The Europeans do not trust the British to look out for the European interests. So as Africans, we really have to learn from them and see that even among themselves, they do not trust each other. They do not behave, apparently, they don't trust that the other is going to behave with integrity. And therefore, even with the free trade agreement that the UK is talking about signing with the United States, they fear that the United States is going to take advantage. So I think that is very instructive for Africa, and it brings us to where we are today. During this pandemic, we have a reset. The globe has a reset. Africa has shut down to the West. Is this now the opportunity for Africa to remain, to reimagine a new type of economy, a new type of African economy that that looks intra-African? You know, Africans right now have locked Africa out to outsiders, and we don't know how long this could go on. So, is this the time for Africa to hit reset and be instructed by the way the British, for example, are negotiating with the Europeans to renegotiate our contracts with the West? We
do not need to be instructed by the British. They've instructed us enough. We need to be instructed by what works for the African. I think our problem has been we're too busy trying to emulate. Let me go back to one comment that you made in terms of the British. Right now, the British and the rest of the European nations, they are treating each other as equal. They are, look at it as two brothers fighting for their mother's breast milk. May the best man win. They are equals. They look at each other as equals. When they start negotiating with a black man, they are not negotiating as equals. They are not giving the black man the respect that they need to give. Let me give you an example. How do you negotiate with someone? In my case, in our case as Africans, I look at the colonizers, all of Europe. They are in my house, eating my food that I would have served them, and then after I finish serving them, I go under the table and I wait for them to drop off some crumbs. How do I have a conversation as equals when I'm under the table and they are on the table? That's not an equal conversation. How do you have a conversation as equals when you're under the table and they are on the table? Until we are on the table, that's the only way we can have an equal conversation. That is the difference when they negotiate with black people in Africa versus negotiating among themselves. They can fight each other. We fight each other as Africans. We have not been able to amass wealth in any meaningful way, and yet we are the inheritors of the richest continent on earth. You take Jews, only 15 million Jews in the world. They rule the world. 15 million people, they rule the world. Why? When the Jews were considered outcasts, they realized that their only survival was within with their unity. So they came together, they united, and they committed to pulling all their financial resources together. Jews don't have to go to anybody to borrow money. They borrow money from their own banks. Why have we black people failed to create a meaningful unity? Because it is only through our unity, no other way, that we can reclaim the respect that we deserve as black people, as a race, as Africans. Why have we failed to do that? The answer goes back to the Berlin Conference. And even prior to the Berlin Conference, how we were made to believe everything African was bad and everything European was better and more desirable. And I like to use an example of even when the British came to, in my case, the country of Zimbabwe. You know, we didn't know about the white angels, the white Jesus Christ, and the black devil. But they came, the missionaries told us about the angels who were white and Jesus Christ who was white. And then they said, oh, look at us. We may not look white like this sheet of paper, but we too are white. So their race is assigned to everything beautiful and desirable. Then they turned around and they told us about this other image called the devil, and that the devil was black and everything undesirable was black. You were black to go to funerals, you were white to go to weddings and christening, and then they turn around and say, and by the way, you too, you are black, and this is who you represent. We go to church, we all sit and we are worshiping white angels and a white Jesus Christ, who, by the way, Jesus Christ is not white. So every Sunday, we kneel in front of a white Jesus. We kneel in front of white angels. Who on earth has seen the angels? Who has seen the devils? Talk to me. So this is systematic brainwashing. Why have we not questioned that? Why do we continue to see white Jesuses and white angels all over churches in Africa?
Well, that's where we're in agreement. It is systematic.
Yes, and we start there.
And that systematic brainwashing has been done historically using the Machiavellian model.
Precisely.
And it has worked. It has definitely worked in Africa.
Resounding success in Africa.
So here we...
For them.
For Europeans, for outsiders, because today...
For their benefit,
China,
to our detriment.
Right, because today even China is applying the very same methods to the same outcomes that we are seeing, and even far more aggressive. So, to your point, now that we are here, how do Africans get out of that mentality? Because that is a psychological state that we are in that we have gotten to as a result of psychological abuse and neglect, systematic psychological abuse that is meant to produce exactly the result that it has produced. So how do we as Africans now come onto the table and negotiate as equals? The onus is on Africans. How do we get there?
It's education.
Where does it begin?
You start with education. You take, for example, why do we, in the 21st century, continue to use colonial textbooks in our schools? We need to teach our children the history. We need to teach our children the truth. Going back to the example of what I was using, black versus white. How do we black mothers raise our children at home, telling them you're black and you're beautiful, but when they step outside the door, they're immediately surrounded by a world that has nothing but negativity about that which they represent? The white kid, on the other hand, parents tell them you're wonderful, you're beautiful, you're desirable. When they step outside the door, the world validates what they're being told at home. How do these two kids grow up as equals? The black kid is too busy trying to be what is more desirable. The white kid doesn't have to struggle with all that because he already knows. He was born being told this is what he is, and when he goes outside, the world says, absolutely, this is who you are. We have to undo those lies. We need to tell our children that those were lies. Those are the lies Martin Luther King spoke about. That one day, someday, somebody lied. We must call out the lies. Our children must know these are lies. We start with preschool. We start in our homes. The devil is not black. The angels are not white. In my village growing up, being an angel was based on deeds. When you are a good, righteous human being, you are an angel. Color has nothing to do with it. When you are a bad person who does evil things, like the policeman who sat on George Floyd, that's a devil. That is a devil incarnate. And let's call a devil what it is. Let's teach our children who is the devil. Those who commit evil deeds against others, they are the personification of a devil. And we must teach our children the truth. There is no such thing as a white angel and a black angel. No, it's a figment of their imagination, and they used it to demoralize us and feel like we're the scum of the earth. We have a responsibility to teach our children the truth and nothing but the truth.
So you're talking about a renewed curriculum starting from kindergarten, an African-based education system. Is that what I'm hearing?
Not necessarily African-based. It is a system, an educational system that speaks truth to power. So wherever you find black people, they no longer feel inferior. But the education is needed even for the white people as well. They must understand that they're not superior to anybody. They are not superior to anybody. They are human beings just like any other race. So the education goes both ways. Because some of the white people are racist, they don't even realize they're racist. Let me share a story with you. I was seeing a patient, a white lady, and I was getting ready to give her an antibiotic, and I said, by the way, are you allergic to anything? Like I would always say. And she goes, oh, no, Dr. C, please don't you ever give me penicillin. She starts telling me a story somewhere in down south at a teaching hospital, and a student doctor, a resident, gave her a shot of penicillin. She said, Doc, the student doctor gave me a shot of penicillin. They had to rush me to the emergency room. They stuck me all over, Doc. By the time they were done with me, I was so black and blue, I looked like half an eagle. And this woman is talking to me. Yeah, she caught me right dead in my tracks. And I remember I was writing and I just stopped. I looked at this woman and she was as serious as a heart attack. And I was just trying to compose myself and I said, oh, just half a nigger. Try being a whole one, honey. And she goes, oh, Dr. C, you are so funny. It went right above her head. Because in her silly little head, I was either one, a medical doctor, therefore I couldn't be a nigger. Or I was African, therefore I couldn't be a nigger. It is crazy. It is insanity of the highest order. But she had no clue that she had just said something absolutely awful. Are you with me? So they too need healing. They too need healing. They too need education. So the education is both sides. When you can stand up and think you're superior to another human being, when you think you can sit, put your knee on somebody else, another human being, and think nothing of it for 10 goddamn minutes, you are the devil. And there are many others like you, you need healing. And they too need education. And we must call a spade a spade. And we need to call them devils because they are devils.
So a reimagining of heaven and hell, angels and devils as based on deeds.
Based on deeds, that's it. And that was my village definition. You see, when I came to this country, you know, Americans like to say, oh, you're beautiful, oh, you're beautiful. I resented that. I'll tell you why. Because in my village, the box for beauty was well defined. If you were a good kid, you went to school, brought back good grades, you respected your teachers, you respected your elders in the village, you did your chores, you were beautiful. You didn't need a constant dose of you're beautiful, you're pretty. No, because you knew you were beautiful because you checked all the boxes of beauty. And when you were not a good kid, you knew you were ugly. And at any given time in your developmental phases, there were certain things that were expected of you. And if you checked all those boxes, you were beautiful. Then I come to this country and people are talking about, oh, you're beautiful. I'm like, well, you're not qualified to classify my beauty. You don't know me. I used to get offended because you can't tell me I am beautiful because you do not know me. But once you get to know me, now you're qualified to call me beautiful. So I had to learn that they don't mean anything by it. That's just the culture. So now I accept it, but physically on a deep level, I'm not very comfortable with people saying you're beautiful because if you don't know me, you're just a liar, you know. I'd get used to that. But that was my definition of beauty in my village. That was my definition of a devil. In our village, yes, you become a devil when you do bad deeds. And this issue of going to church and brainwashing us every Sunday, worshiping a white Jesus and white angels and not speaking the truth. How have we allowed such lies to be told to us for so long? And this is why the black race is where the black race is. We must speak the truth. We must teach our children the truth. And yes, both sides, the white side, the white race, the black race, the brown race, we all need healing. And we all must know the truth.